lesson, we'll cover opening a standalone Revit MEP project. So you may be asking first, well, what is a standalone Revit project? And then if it's not standalone, what other type of projects are there? Well, a standalone project is basically what it says. It's standalone. There's no other sharing, if you will, of work sharing with other disciplines. For example, in an office, you may have multiple disciplines working on a Revit file. Architecture, doing the walls, doors, windows. MEP, the mechanical systems, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and maybe also structural engineers, creating various structural elements, columns, beams, steel girders, if you will, within that Revit model. Now, two ways to handle that would be work sharing, where people are collaborating on that one actual model itself. So all of those disciplines add their designs, create their elements, and then it's collaborated or shared through work sharing. Or the file is just standalone, meaning everything is contained within the file, or there are links to elements that aren't in a file, for example, maybe 2D drawings, etc. In this example here for this lesson, we're going to open a standalone file. So in Revit, to open any standalone file, whether that be a tutorial or something you're currently working on, but you've already saved. To do that, I'll go either to the Open under Projects, or go to the large R and click Open. Or if you have the flyout, you can go on the flyout and then select Project as well. That'll open up basically a window where you can browse to the file that you want to open. In this example here, I'm going to open up the file labeled 301. I'll select it and then click Open. That will open the file into my current Revit session to speed the Revit project. Now, if it were a previous version file that I'm opening, you would have a little message window pop up saying it's being converted to the latest version, and then it would open. Now, once in this file, everything is contained within the file itself. If I had other elements linked, let's say 2D drawings for details or 2D drawings for other types of schematics or schedules, I would see those in the Revit links on the lower left in my project browser. Also, if I were using work sets or collaborative sharing, I would see that on the bottom of my screen. But we're not using any of that here. This is basically just a standalone project that we're opening. So it's pretty basic, pretty straightforward for opening the element up. And then from here, I can navigate my different views underneath the project browser, looking at the different views based on discipline or based on functional area, floor plan, section, detail, etc. And then I have all the structural tabs across the top to go through and make the modifications or enhancements to the Revit model. Once I'm done, if I choose to save the same name, I can go to the large R and then just click Save. Or you can go to Save As and click Project and give the project a different name. Totally up to you. So in summary, for this lesson, we looked at what is a standalone project, opening a standalone project, and then saving the standalone project. In this lesson, we'll look at viewing the model in 2D. So if you look at the model on my screen right now, there's a 2D representation of the section view, basically a slice through the model at a given point. And at that slice, there's a depth or a clip, so I can only see so far back in depth. There's also a crop around the right and the left, top and the bottom, cutting off those elements so I don't see anything to the right, to the left, to the top, or the bottom. Now this is just one type of 2D view. There's also floor plans, ceiling plans, elevations, and detail views, or drafting views, if you will, of specific details. Now all of these can be seen in the project browser in the lower left. So if we go to that area, you'll have a grouping called Views. If you expand that, you'll see subgroupings depending upon how your Views browsers are sorted. So to see that sort order, right-click Views and click Browser Organization. This will show me how those views are sorted and grouped. For this example, we're going to leave it set to Type and Discipline. If it's not set to that, set it to Type and Discipline and click OK. So now I can see I have subtypes of views. For example, floor plans. I can expand floor plans, and I see subtypes, electrical and mechanical. And let's say if I expand mechanical, I have all the different types of mechanical views within this project. Now about the crop and the clip, for example, for the section view that I have on my screen. The properties of the view, since nothing is selected, are in the Properties window. If you have something selected, just click Modify. It'll deselect anything, and then it'll go back to the default view for section. Now, scroll your properties down, almost toward the bottom, until you get to the area called extents. This is where you have the crop and the clip. So for example, right now the view is cropped. If I were to uncheck mark that and then click on the screen, you can see the rest of the view to the right appears. If you click on the crop again and click on the screen, it disappears. Now the crop region isn't visible, but I could make that visible if I check mark the crop region visibility box, and you'd see it. Go ahead and uncheck that. Now the clipping, there's a button for far clipping. If I click on that, I actually see that I'm clipping without a line or with a line or no clip at all. There's also the far clip depth, meaning how far back from that section line or that section cut you see elements. And I can change that numerically. And we'll cover all this a little more in another lesson covering views. But now to look at some of the other views. For example, if I want to look at a 2D plan view, I can double-click Level 1 HVAC plan. That will show me the overall plan view for this entire building for Level 1. If you scroll down, you have other plan views for the second level and also the third level. Also for plumbing, for HVAC, and electrical. There's also plan views for specific areas, such as the toilet room. If I double-click the toilet room, I have a plan view layout for that room. Now, outside of the plan views, in 2D, we also have ceiling plan views. And you have these grouped under coordination for level 1, level 2, and level 3. This gets into where we start work sharing. But just to illustrate the plan, if I double-click level 1 ceiling plan, this will show me the view of a level 1 ceiling plan. Now, there are other views too. If I scroll down below 3D, you have your elevations and your sections and drafting view. Section is what we were originally looking at for our section views. So there's all sorts of different types of section views. If you go to drafting and expand drafting to mechanical, you see you have drafting views. These are more detailed views. Now you can either draw these and create these inside of Revit, or you can link them. Now other 2D elements that you may not think are really 2D since they're not the model are things with text or annotation, such as legends. So if I expand legends and double click one of the legend views, you actually have the text for that legend. That information is placed on your drawing sheet. If I scroll down a little more, you have schedules and quantities. Expanding those and double clicking, in this case, let's say mechanical equipment schedule, shows me the schedule for the mechanical equipment. And then below that, we have more schedules. We also have reports. And then finally, our drawing sheets. And for example, I can double click the M100 mechanical legend, and it shows me the drawing sheet. So that's kind of looking at both 2D elements when it regards the model, and also 2D elements that aren't really the model, but 2D drawings, if you will. Now there's a lot of views open, and we'll talk about this a little more in the view section, but you can actually sort a tile and open up different views or cycle through them in a multitude of ways. To close the view you're on, you can simply go to the right and click the X, and that will close the view. Another way would be to go to the View tab, and then on the right side of the View tab, in the Windows area, you have a drop-down called Switch Windows. This would allow you to switch between each one of these view windows that you previously opened. So I could go back to that floor plan toilet room just by selecting it. You also could say Close Hidden, meaning close everything but the current window that's open. And then the remaining buttons to the right of that would let me, for example, cascade the windows. So I could select the cascade button that would cascade those. Or depending on the number of windows you had open and the size of your monitor, you could tile the windows. This really isn't a good example because there's so many windows that it's not really efficient in the tiling of this mode. But where it could be efficient is if you're looking at the right, the left, the top, and maybe a plan view, so 4 views. Here, again, you could just simply click the X, and that will close your windows. And then I can go back and retile these. Or I can maximize one of the windows and say Close Hidden, and now what it does is close everything but the current window. So in this lesson as a review, we looked at the two-dimensional model, both 2D elements of the model itself, and also 2D elements that aren't necessarily the model, but supporting information for that model, such as legends, annotation, and sheets. In this lesson, we'll look at viewing the model in 3D. So everything you design in Revit, for the most part, is a three-dimensional object. Therefore, it could be rotated, zoomed, spun around. We can look at the different sides, the right, the left, the top, the bottom, the front, or the back. And what you have on your screen right now is just a section cut of the actual model. To view the 3D elements, you can look at existing three-dimensional views, or we can look at the default three-dimensional view. To look at existing 3D views that may exist in a Revit project, look in the project browser in the lower left. Expand Views, and depending on how your browser is sorted, you may see a grouping for 3D views. To look at the sort order for the browser, right-click on Views, click Browser Organization, and verify the type and discipline are selected, and then click OK. Now you should have a section called 3D Views. If you expand that, there's two subsections, one for electrical and one for mechanical. If you expand mechanical, you'll see a three-dimensional views already created and saved for the mechanical elements. So for example, if I double-click on the 3D ducting equipment, that will show me a three-dimensional view of all the elements within the building, no crop or no clip, in 3D. If I look at room 53, 3D fire protection, this will show me a cropped view of just room 53, with various elements visible and various elements not visible. Likewise for all of the other elements listed here in the 3D view. Now, you can also look at the overall general three-dimensional view. And to do that, you can double-click on 3D underneath mechanical. That will show me the three-dimensional view by default. Or, above your ribbon, you could go to the little house, and the little house is the default 3D view. So in either of those last two methods, you can get to this default 3D view. Now, keep in mind for this example here, depending on how much RAM you have in your computer and your graphics card, this view may be a little slow. So you may want to use a smaller model for this example. But looking at this now, you can zoom in, you can zoom out by rolling the mouse wheel, that is. Holding the wheel will allow you to pan back and forth, or you could use the view cube on the right. The view cube that's visible allows you to do several things. One is you can simply click on a surface, an edge, or a corner, and it will rotate the view cube and the model accordingly. So if I click on a corner, it will show me an isometric view of that model. If you click on a face, it will show me that view orientation, for example, front. In this orientation, if you click on one of the arrows to the right or the left, top or the bottom, it'll rotate that cube and also the model 90 degrees. To get back to the default three-dimensional orientation, above the view cube to the left is a house. Click on it, it's the home button. It'll take you back to the default home view. Now there's also a ring represented by the locations north, south, east, and west. If you hold your left mouse button down on it, you can actually rotate this on a pivot. It'll rotate the model. Or again, you can freely just move your mouse about the screen, roll the wheel mouse up and down, or to rotate, hold the shift key or the control key to zoom in and out. So there's a variety of different ways. Also, if you're a three-dimensional mouse user or you have a 3D mouse, you can use that to rotate the model, to zoom in, to zoom out, depending on the 3D mouse and the settings that you have. And then to get back to the default three-dimensional view, I can just hit the house button or home button, and that takes me back to the default 3D view. So as a review, in this lesson, we covered viewing the model, but looking at it in 3D. In this lesson, we'll cover the Systems tab, specifically the HVAC and mechanical tabs. So inside of Revit, on the ribbon of the Systems tab, you have a variety of MEP commands. The first area we'll look at for this lesson is the HVAC area of the Systems tab. So go ahead and open up the actual project for this lesson. Once it's open, click the Systems tab. Now, to look at the settings for your systems, specifically for HVAC, there's a little drop-down arrow to the right. If you hover over that and pause, you'll see a description called Mechanical Settings. The little indicator inside of brackets, MS, is the keyboard shortcut if you'd like to key that in. I'm going to go ahead and click the arrow. Once I do, I see the Mechanical System Settings for HVAC. Starting on the left, with hidden lines selected, I see the settings for my various hidden lines. If you click on duct settings, I see the settings for overall ductwork. Below that are the sub-settings for ductwork, such as the allowable angles that you can create using your ductwork. You can use any angle or restrict it to specific angles. For conversion, you can set the different conversion heights or offsets for your different duct runs. Rectangular, oval, and round are the various sizes or allowable sizes for these types of duct work. For example, for your rectangular duct work, you have your different sizes and how they're used. Same thing with oval and also with round. Calculation then shows us the calculations we can use in this example for pressure drop. Now below that you also have pipe settings, but we'll cover pipe settings in an additional lesson. Go ahead and click OK. Now on the mechanical part of the ribbon, you also have a drop down here for mechanical settings. Clicking this drop down arrow shows you the same mechanical settings as we just looked at. Now the icons on the HVAC panel on the Systems tab, starting on the left. Duct is the command to actually create duct work, either round, rectangular, or oval, based upon the settings that we chose. Here you can actually use the command to create the ductwork from point to point. The next command over is duct placeholder. It really does the same thing, but you're not placing in elbow or tree fittings as you design your ductwork. To the right of that, you have duct fittings. This is where you can include elbows, T's, crosses, or other types of fittings inside of your duct runs. Below that are duct accessories, dampers, filters, smoke detectors. And below that is flex duct, or the ability to change any particular length of duct work to a flexible run of duct. Now to the right of that is flex duct. This is where you can actually draw a round or rectangular ductwork that's flexible from point to point. Air terminals are those registers, grills, or diffusers that you can place into your ductwork systems. And lastly, the mechanical equipment are things such as boilers, furnaces, and fans, or other mechanical equipment that you can place inside of your duct system itself. So as a review in this lesson, we looked at the HVAC and mechanical settings. We first looked at the settings for these systems, then we explored the actual icons on the HVAC tab. We started by looking at duct placeholders, duct accessories, flexible duct, air terminals, and lastly, mechanical equipment. In this lesson, we'll look at an overview of the Systems tab, specifically plumbing and piping. So in Revit, on the ribbon, click the Systems tab. The area we'll focus on is almost in the middle, and it's in the area called piping and plumbing. Now before we look at the individual commands, let's look at the plumbing and piping settings. To the right of the word plumbing and piping, there's a drop-down arrow. Go ahead and click that arrow, and that will display the various mechanical settings. So go ahead and click Pipe Settings. Listed here are various settings and values. Click on Angles. This is where you can specify to use specific angles or use any angle that you want to create. Click Conversion. This is where I can set my different system classification by the drop-down in the top right, and then set settings for my main trunk of my plumbing line or any branches off of that main trunk. Click Segment Sizes. This is where you can set nominal inside and outside diameters for various pipe settings and segments based on material. So on the drop-down list on the very top, to the right of segment, this is where you can select your pipe type based on material, and then you can look at the various different sizes in the table below. You can also add new sizes or delete existing ones. Click Fluids. This is where you can set fluid names and then average temperatures and dynamic viscosity and density of each fluid. Clicking the drop-down will display those fluids already in the system, or you can click the icon to the right to add a new fluid or to delete an existing fluid. Click Slopes. These are the allowable slopes for your various pipe runs within plumbing. And finally, click Calculation. This is where you can set the calculation for pressure drop and also for flow within piping systems. Then you click OK. And that was an overview of the actual piping and plumbing system settings. Now the functional commands for piping and plumbing are in that same area. So piping is our first actual command. Piping allows us to draw a rigid piping run from point A to point B, horizontal, vertical, or slope pipes. Pipe placeholder allows you to create a pipe run without any elbows or any fittings. Those could later be turned into a pipe system with fittings. parallel pipe allows you to create parallel pipes based on the initial pipe run that's already created. Pipe fittings. This allows you to place a pipe fitting, a T, an elbow into an existing pipe run. Pipe accessories. This is where you can drop in valves, different connectors within your piping system or your piping run simply by dragging and dropping. Flex pipe. This allows you to draw a flexible pipe. Plumbing fixtures. These are the fixtures you're allowed to place into the plumbing system. Now, note there's also additional plumbing fixtures that you may have used in the architectural system. Some of those don't actually have the intelligence built into them for supply lines, hot water, cold water, or your waste lines for removal. These plumbing fixtures have intelligence so they can connect the actual supply lines and waste lines, and you'll be able to analyze the system. Sprinkler. Sprinkler is basically what it says, allowing you to add a sprinkler head into the actual piping and plumbing system. So this was an overview of the Systems tab, primarily plumbing and piping, and looking at the settings for plumbing and piping, and the tools for creating plumbing and piping systems. In this lesson, we'll look at the Systems tab, specifically the electrical area. So in Revit, let's go ahead and click the Systems tab on the ribbon. The electrical area is to the right of the ribbon. Now before we look at each of the tools to create electrical elements, let's look at the electrical settings. To the right of the word electrical is a drop-down arrow. Go ahead and click that, and that will display the electrical settings. Now there are a lot of electrical settings within electrical in Revit MEP. Briefly as an overview, I'll go through each one of these. The first setting are the hidden lines and how you would like those hidden lines created. Below that are the general settings for your electrical components. Angles are where you can tell Revit to create a specific angle, use an angle increment, or use the angle that you tell it to. Wiring, these are the general settings for wiring and their values. Now below that are the wire sizes. The wire sizes are based on material, temperature, and insulation type, and you can see that by clicking the drop-down arrow, where you can choose different ones that are already preloaded, or you can add, or you can remove. Likewise, for the amps listed below each, you can add, change, or remove these. Now below wire sizes on the left are your correction factors for again each material and temperature, and also ground conductor settings for each material. Below that are your wire types. These are wire types that are already pre-configured based on ratings in the insulation and the sizes within Revit MEP. Voltage definitions are below that, using your standard definitions, or again, you can add definitions as well. Likewise here are your standard distribution systems, their settings, and again, you can add or remove these. Now below wiring are your cable tray settings. These here are your general settings for cable trays. Rise, drop below that are your settings for your rise and drop within that cable run. And then you also have single line and two line symbols. This is where I can create and change those symbols depending upon this cable run that you're creating. And then sizes. These are the sizes you can use for creating your cable trays. Now below the cable tray settings are your conduit settings. These are your general settings for conduit. And just like cable tray, you have rise, drop setting, and also your single line and two line symbols. Below that are your conduit size settings. Now they're based upon standards. So in the drop down at the very top, you can change the standard and see those settings for sizes for each standard. Again, you can add, change, or remove any of these standard sizes. Now below that are your load calculations for all of the above. Looking at load classifications, click on the button Load Classifications. This shows me load classifications for different elements within an electrical system. So as you click on each one of these, you'll see the name, demand factor, and then any class that may be associated. Click OK. To look at demand factors, click the Demand Factors button. This shows me the factors, again, based on the electrical equipment or the electrical component that you select on the left. And as I select each one of these, you can see the various settings or those elements are listed. Then click OK. And lastly, our panel schedules. These are the base settings for your panel schedules. So as you can see, there's a lot of electrical settings already pre-configured within Revit MEP. And again, we'll touch base on those in one of the additional lessons moving forward. Then click OK. Now, as far as the commands to create electrical components, in the electrical area of the ribbon, underneath systems, the first option is wire. This is where you can create different types of wire runs. In this case, I'm looking at creating an arc wire just by clicking several points defining that wire run from component to component or from element to element. You can also do a spline wire or a chamfered wire. The next icon over is cable tray. This is where you can create a straight cable tray that's rigid, one that is in a channel or more of a ladder approach. The next icon beyond that is conduit. This allows you to create a straight, rigid run conduit. Again, you can add corners or bends, and then the fittings would be associated. Parallel conduit allows you to create parallel conduit associated to a conduit that's already created, as depicted in this tutorial or little video. To the right of that are cable tray fittings. This is where you can drop in fittings within an existing cable tray run for corners or tees, for example. Below that are conduit fittings. Just like cable tray fittings, you can apply your fittings for your conduit connecting your straight runs. And then to the right of that is electrical equipment. This is where you can drop in different electrical equipment such as panels, other switches, and other gear, and have your electrical systems tied into these. To the right of that is a drop down for devices. And there's a lot of different devices that you can put into your electrical equipment or your electrical system. First one are electrical fixtures. These could be receptacles, junction boxes. You then have communications, you have data, you have fire alarm components for detectors, lighting elements for different sensors, you have nurse call station elements, security, and then also telephone elements. All these can be placed within that electrical system. And then finally, to the right of that, you have lighting fixtures. These allow you to place in lighting fixtures that can be associated to the ceiling, to the wall, or to the floor. And they're calculated in the electrical system, so they're smart, they have intelligence. This lesson was an overview on the electrical components within MEP. We looked at the electrical settings and the vastness of those electrical settings, and we also looked at the various commands for creating electrical elements ranging from wires, cable trays, to conduit, and then all of the devices and the equipment that would go in each of those electrical systems.